Hi, I'm Dr. Deet Harrison. I'm president of Chiropractic BioPhysics Technique and Seminars, but I'm also president of Chiropractic BioPhysics Nonprofit, or CBP Nonprofit. Now, the two companies are separated, and actually CBP Nonprofit, you can call it a company, but it's really a nonprofit research organization. And we follow all national and international guidelines for a proper nonprofit research organization who's dedicated to spine rehabilitation, spine treatment, spine analysis, and in essence, conservative chiropractic research. CBP Nonprofit consists of a board of 13 chiropractors that all serve in a capacity where they do not get paid to be on this board. Also, Chiropractic BioPhysics Nonprofit has an institutional review board of independent members that are not chiropractors, and these are the people that review and or approve or reject the ethics of our research proposals that the CBP Nonprofit Board of Chiropractors might put forth and propose. And what we found over the years is, although chiropractors are aware of Chiropractic BioPhysics Nonprofit, they don't really read the research that we've put out. Starting in 1993, when our first paper was put out in the Journal of Manipulative and Physiological Therapeutics, we have collectively, as an organization, funded and published approximately 156 scientific peer-reviewed research reports. And what we find is the majority of those have not been read by the average clinician out there. So what I'm going to start doing in a weekly video series is reviewing from start to finish in a historical manner the CBP nonprofit research publications that we have to date. And the research publications, we have a list of these reports online on our website, and if you'll look up at the screen for me, please. Here's the URL for this research link, and on this link we have the majority of our 156 publications posted. These are posted in order of topic. So if you'll go to this URL and look at this particular list and scroll down, you can find our research categorized by type of study. Okay, or study design, if you will. And again, about 36 of them are missing, and we're working to improve that. But over the years, we've kind of misplaced a few of the papers, and we have to go through this list and identify which ones are missing. What I'd like to do in this first video is really provide you an overview with one of the first, or the first research publications that we've done in Chiropractic BioPhysics Nonprofit. So back to our presentation. To begin, what's normal? Well, we had to look at this and break it down and say, what are the steps needed in terms of research in order to accurately fill in the gaps, to be able to look back historically and say, yes, we put in all the pieces to be able to test different facets of CBP technique and chiropractic rehabilitative care. And one of the questions is, what is normal? Before we go down the road of what normal is, and or does it matter to health concerns, and can we change this in patient populations, we had to start with the basics. And the basics is, can we accurately measure and assess the state of curvature in the cervical spine from the side? In other words, we have to have line drawing studies where we test the inter and intra examiner reliability. So here's our general review of the CBP lines that we use when we're assessing the state of the sagittal plane curves. We use what's called RRAs, or relative rotation angles, and those are juxtaposition angles. And if you will, these are my segmental angles. So in between two segments of any region of the spine. In this particular project coming up, we're going to talk about the lateral cervical spine. So we have segmental angles that we call relative rotation angles. In other words, the angle of curve between C4 and C5, or C5 and C6, or C6 and C7. And then we have our absolute rotation angle. Our absolute rotation angle is what we term ARA, and that is the total angle of curve. And in the cervical spine, we measure that from C2 to C7. So the total angle of curve is ARA, absolute rotation angle. The segmental curves are RRAs, or relative rotation angles. All the relative rotation angles between C2 to C7 must add up to the ARA of C2 to C7. So when we have those lines, we actually have to study and know the reliability of those lines before we apply this to any patient populations and any outcome studies. Well, problematically, if you look at some of the research community in chiropractic, they've been relatively negative and quite condemning of radiographic line drawing reliability. If you look at this excerpt from 1992 by Dr. Reed Phillips, and I'm going to read it to you, you'll see what the state of the knowledge was thought to be about radiographic line drawing reliability. Given the lack of scientific evidence to support the validity and reliability of X-rays in the biomechanical evaluation of the patient, medical legal concerns should question the value of unjustified exposure to ionizing radiation. Now that's a really strong opinion. Basically what that's saying is there's a higher risk of injury of taking the X-ray to the patient, and that the information you gain from taking the X-ray is relatively A, non-important, and B, non-reliable and objective in its assessment. And you'll understand where I sit on this particular view. I actually take the extreme other end of the spectrum. So that was 1992, Dr. Reed Phillips. Here's 1997 by Schultz and Bassano out of Topics in Clinical Chiropractic. They state, radiography has not demonstrated adequate reliability or validity for the detection and characterization of subluxations. Now, ignoring the validity side of it, what we have here is a very strong statement regarding the lack of reliability of X-ray line drawing. And basically, if you don't have reliability, then the assessments that you do are quite pointless, because two examiners cannot get the same finding or the same measurement, and then the same examiner cannot get the same measurement or the finding. And then JMPT, 1999, Dr. Mitch Haas, a well-known chiropractic researcher and publisher. To date, there is little convincing evidence for the reliability of radiographic analysis of spinal displacement. These are quite strong statements. Now, whether you agree or disagree with those statements, it is an important topic to assess and to test. And in general, the concept of spine X-rays, when we are assessing sagittal plane curves or the coronal plane of the spine, you have to consider at least 4 different topics, and you have to take these to heart, and you have to actually test and publish information on these. So let's look at the 4 big topics that are involved in studying the reliability of spine analysis on X-ray. Okay? Number 1, the intra and inter examiner reliability of the measurements. So can I get the same thing on multiple occasions on the same X-ray? And then can you get the same finding that I have found, right? So that we have inter and intra. Number 2, repeatability of X-ray positioning. Can we actually position the patient in the same manner each time from session A to session B? That's a different topic, but it does relate to the topic of X-ray line drawing reliability. C, or number 3, X-ray projection or distortion. Now, X-ray projection and distortion is more relevant to the validity concern than it is the reliability. But we do have an issue here. We have to consider what are the limits of positioning somebody on the X-ray relative to the information we're interested in. Is the measurement that we're assessing for, is it truly actually found in the subject? And that's a validity concern, not a reliability concern. We know when we go from a 3D object to a 2D object, we lose information, right? So if I take a 3D structure and I compress it on a 2-dimensional plane, I might have some validity concerns. We'll look at that at a later time, right? And then D, This one does go into the reliability, or does relate to the reliability of X-ray line drawing, and that's, is the subject able to achieve the same neutral position of that particular region of the spine over and over again. And it's not necessarily the repeatability of X-ray positioning, are they able to adopt the same neutral position for their spine segments from day to day or from moment to moment? Or do the sagittal plane curves change on their own throughout the day? Like if I sit down versus standing up, I know that I have a difference in the spine alignment. However, if I stand up and I take an X-ray of somebody and then I walk them around, have them sit down, and then walk them around again, is their spine in the same position? And that's like normal fluctuations day to day in the environment of the sagittal plane curves or of each individual joint. We'll have to look at that at a later time, but that would affect the reliability of positioning, and it would also affect the reliability of line drawing in a general concept from session A to session B. So this is the issue we faced in 1993. So we had to investigate the reliability of our procedures. So we took these criticisms to heart, believe it or not, and we said, well, we don't agree with those are legitimate criticisms we have to test and assess. And this is a slide showing you that, up until about 2001, a lot of our work in CBP nonprofit was directed at investigating reliability of our assessments. And so shown on this slide is a list of 9 studies that we put forth to test the reliability of different line drawing procedures that we have in chiropractic biophysics technique. And these are in some of the top journals that are out there in chiropractic and the field of spine. So 9 separate papers. But what you'll notice is the first one that I will be going through with you in this particular video after this background introduction is the 1993 paper by Jackson et al. And here it is. So 1993, and forgive the typo, I just noticed that. I don't want somebody pointing that out before I do, so I just found it. Chiropractic Biophysics Lateral Cervical Film Analysis Reliability, JMPT 1993. So Barry Jackson was a PhD in statistics that my late father and colleagues had met. And my dad approached Barry and said, we want to study different aspects of CBP technique. We want to study the reliability, the validity, the clinical utility, and whether or not our procedures truly impact people's health and well-being. And what Barry said to my dad is, well, how many papers do you think you need to do? And my dad listed it all out, and he said, about 33. And Barry kind of chuckled at him and said, Don, you're going to find out that 33 is just really going to give you a start. In reality, he was right. Today we have 156 peer-reviewed publications, and we're still not done assessing the outcome, validity, and utility of our procedures. However, we feel very confident in the reliability of our procedures. Okay, so 1993, here's our project in the Journal of Manipulative and Physiological Therapeutics. And you have to realize this is groundbreaking work for back in 1993. So what do? We have 3 examiners, 2 that are highly trained and 1 that's a novice clinician that's only been in practice for a short period of time. So we have 2 experienced examiners and 1 non-experienced examiner. The non-experienced examiner does have some background in the measurement, but not as much, practice and skill as the 2 trained examiners. They're going to get 65 lateral cervical films of different people. And these 65 films are free from artifacts, so you can't qualitatively or quantitatively identify who they are just by looking at the film. So it doesn't say their name, etc. The only thing that's written on the film is a marker for the person that's assessing the outcome of the data to be able to see which film it was. Okay, so we have 65 films, 3 examiners. And what we're going to do, the examiner's blinded to the exact film from session 1 to session 2 that they're receiving, and the films are going to be put in random order. By blinded, I mean, hey, there's not a mark here that says this is the clue to the film that you assessed previously, right? It doesn't have a person's name on it. And then we're going to do session 1 to session 2. The films are going to be in random order. So you're not going to be able to keep track of 65 different films when they're thrown at you in a different presentation the next time. Also, the second session, it's going to have a delay, a minimum of 1 day between your repeated measure. So the chances of you remembering exactly what you did on each film from session 1 to session 2, it's going to be pretty limited. And then the examiners were not in the same room at the same time. So they were actually in different locations when they were making these measurements. So they don't get to communicate and say, oh, what'd you do on this film? What'd you get on this one? That's not allowed in this particular project. So we have 65 films. We have 3 examiners. We're going to have a delayed, blinded, repeated measure of the films, and they're presented in random order. And then each examiner gets a protractor and a sharp pencil. And they're going to have to make the measurements by hand, and will enter those measurements into an Excel file or a table, right? And then that data is presented to the statistician, and we look at inter and intra examiner reliability for the measurements that we're concerned with or looking at in this project, okay? So we're going to look at Pearson's R, correlation coefficients. We're going to do some linear models of this. We'll look at the 95% confidence limits, and we'll get a standard error of measurement for these. We'll also use the analysis of variance, so the ANOVA. Here's the lines that we were looking at, the atlas plane line to horizontal. Now in this project, the examiners were told to look at the inferior tubercle of the anterior and the posterior aspect of the atlas, and that's how we drew our atlas plane line. So atlas plane line to horizontal right here, okay? Then we also looked at what we call an anterior head translation distance, measured as the term S here. And the examiners here in this particular project, we looked at the inferior posterior corner of C7 vertebral body, and they were told to draw a vertical line straight up the film and measure the posterior superior aspect of C2 body corner relative to that vertical line. So we have a horizontal offset, the distance S up here. So my distance S is the measurement of anterior head translation, okay? We did not use T1 to C1 on these films because a couple of them you could not see T1, so the examiners were told to use C7, okay? And by the way, C7 was not marked on the film. The examiners had to find that. We also looked at our relative rotation angles at each segmental angle from C2 to C7. So we compared C6 to C7, C5 to C6, C4 to C5, C3 to C4, C2 to C3, our relative rotation angles. They were also then required to do an absolute rotation angle. So C2 to C7, posterior vertebral body of C2 relative to the posterior vertebral body of C7. Where they intersect, that angle there, that's my absolute rotation angle. So the examiners use a protractor and a best fit line on the back of the vertebral body margins for absolute rotation angle and relative rotation angles. It's important to do the relative rotation angles because we get an understanding of the actual alignment of the whole curve. We can see segmental angles, we can see total angles of curve, right? We want to know what is the distribution of this curve. We don't just want to see the total angle of the curve. We want to see where the kyphosis or straightening is, where it changes directions. These things are important, right? You don't just look at the total angle of curve. So here's what we identified. Table 1 is the examiner reliability for the 3 examiners for session 1 and session 2, and then you'll see the statistics, and then we'll see the standard error of measurement. Okay, and this table 1 is for the atlas plane line. So this is the atlas plane line to horizontal, and I'm just going to have you follow my cursor here. Examiner number 1, The mean reading was 14.8 degrees. The standard deviation, 7.42. That's the first reading. And then here's the mean of the second reading, 14.46, 7.14. Now that gives me a rough estimate of how close these measurements are from session 1 to session 2, but it doesn't truly tell me the exact examiner error. So this is why we look at the statistical analysis. We have the Pearson R value. 1.0 is perfect. When you see Pearson R of 0.99 and you see a confidence interval of 0.97 to 0.99, you've got to say, whoa, this is really, really consistent from session 1 to session 2. The total standard error of measurement for examiner 1, 0.7 degrees for the Atlas plane line from session 1 to session 2. And then you can follow the same thing for examiner number 2 all the way across. You find out the standard error of measurement is 1.1. And then examiner number 2, or number 3, is 1.2. Overall, when you look at this, the mean of the 3 examiners, the standard error of measurement is 1.0 degrees. That's really, really reliable. And you can look at the inter and intra examiner reliability in this project, and you'll see it's spot on with that 1 degree mark. Then table 2. Table 2 reports the absolute rotation angle reliability, C2 to C7. And you just follow me with this table. Here's the mean values of the 3 examiners. Here's their standard deviation. Here's the mean of the second reading, or session B, of all the 65 films. Here's their standard deviation. And then here's their reliability correlation coefficients, right? And when you look at their standard error of measurement, on average, it's really close to what we found with the Atlas plane line, but it's a little bit higher. One examiner was approaching the 2 degree error mark. The mean standard error of measurement across all 3 examiners, 1.2 degrees. And then down here, table 3, the reliability for the 3 examiners for anterior head translation on the 65 films. And I'm just going to get you to focus in on the standard error of measurement, 1.4, 1.4, and 0.9. The average across the examiners was 1.23. Now, this is really important. This is really impactful information. I've got examiners, 3 different people. 2 of them are experienced, 1 of them is non-experienced. They're given 65 different films. These 65 different films have various amounts of degenerative joint disease. There's not severe overt arthritis in these films, but mild to moderate degeneration was included. And when you look at this, the examiners, for example, the ARAs, examiner 1 gets 15, examiner 2 gets 14, examiner 3 gets 13. We're within 1 degree of each other from the spread, 14 plus or minus 1. In other words, each examiner can do this repeatedly from person to person and from session to session. We can get the same thing over and over again. That's an important thing. The idea that X-ray line drawing is not reliable is absolutely untrue. Where do these people come up with this, you wonder? Well, what they do is they pull 1 or 2 projects from way back when where examiners, for whatever reason, weren't able to identify actual, parts of the vertebral bodies on the X-ray. And maybe they were given bad protractors, and maybe they were using thick leaded pencils, or maybe they were just blind and they couldn't see. But I'm here to tell you, every project we've ever done, we've found high examiner reliability, inter and intra, and you can tell I got a little excited about that. It's frustrating for me to see this in the literature put out by some of the top researchers in chiropractic saying that X-ray line drawing is not reliable. 1993 was our first project, and we showed it had excellent examiner reliability, inter and intra. Here's the relative rotation angles. The relative rotation angles, there's 1 examiner and at 1 level that was a little bit higher than the rest, but we're talking only 2 degrees. And if you'll look at this table, I'll point it out to you. 1.95 degrees, and that's examiner number 3 looking at the C4, C5 joint. Now, likely speaking, the C4, C5 joint had a little more arthritic change there, a little more disc degeneration, so it can be harder to see some of those structures. But still, if you'll look, that examiner was only 2 degrees in the reliability, and the other examiners were actually under 1 degree. So when you look at this table, on average, what you'll find is the majority of the relative rotation angles are less than 1 degree for their standard error of measurement. Once in a while, you'll see one that approaches 2 degrees. Still, highly, highly reliable. Excellent inter and intra examiner reliability. We had to do this project, and we have to do the other areas too. We have to identify, can trained examiners in the method, can they get the same finding as another examiner? This is extremely important. So far, what we've shown is absolutely, the answer is yes. In this project, these examiners can. And I'm betting that you can too. And if you can't, come to a conference and I'll teach you how to do the lines myself. And I guarantee you, you'll be able to do it. Now, quickly, how do you support CBP nonprofit research? We need your support. So we can't do these projects without doctors in the community supporting our efforts and our work. The chiropractic board, the 13 members of CBP nonprofit, our board of directors, they don't get paid. In fact, all the board members have to pay to be a board member. They have to pay the annual dues. Our annual dues are only $400 a year. So for $400 a year, we take this money from the board members and we do research publications. We pay our statisticians, we pay for equipment, etc. We also ask doctors in the community of CBP to help support us. What you can do is you can support us in one of 2 ways. You can go to Amazon Local, and just by shopping online, you can select Chiropractic BioPhysics nonprofit as the nonprofit research foundation for you to support. Amazon Local will take a small percent of your purchase and they'll donate it back to CBP nonprofit. So you do it indirectly. It doesn't cost you anything. You just have to select CBP nonprofit on Amazon Local. The other way to support us is directly supporting us. You go to Chiropractic BioPhysics nonprofit online, this URL. It takes you to our web store on idealspine.biz. And if you will pay your annual dues of at least $400 a year, we'll send you a CBP nonprofit research CD with all our peer-reviewed publications as PDF files, okay? And we update that on a yearly basis. We need your help to do work like this. You can see why this project is needed, and in future videos you'll see an evolution of this project into other ones, and you'll see the history of what we've laid out. Until next time, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you again on the next video. Thank you.